Greetings. Welcome to Week 7 of GIS 4630, Public Domain Data for GIS. Joseph Kursky here with you. Let's talk about putting public domain spatial data to work. Now, you might argue that you've been working with it throughout this course, and indeed for many of you, for your whole careers, or at least for your program at the University of Denver. True, but we're going to talk about the practicalities of putting public domain spatial data to work this week. You will also continue to reflect upon the broader issues of metadata and the history and the foundations of public domain spatial data in the USA. So you'll have the opportunity to reflect upon the relevancy and success of the US NSDI, the National Spatial Data Infrastructure, also the Federal Geographic Data Committee's mission, or FGDC. You will consider issues of metadata and think about putting public domain spatial data to work. So you'll be reflecting on your readings and doing a short activity that I will describe in a moment. Now please read Chapter 7 in your textbook, which will provide context and information about putting public domain spatial data to work. I also want you to examine the documents, as I will describe in a moment, and reflect upon them in our discussion forum. NSDI and FGDC, important acronyms for GIS and data. I want you to read the FGDC metadata fact sheet. You might think, well, this is all pretty dry stuff. Well, it is in a sense, but it's important documentation. And actually, the FGDC has done a pretty noble job of getting it into a format where it's fairly easy to read this stuff. I also want you to read the 10 most common metadata errors. Also, I want you to read the Executive Order 12906. This is a really important one, the one that described and set up the NSDI back in the 1990s. I also want you to respond to the FGDC Framework Guide. What are framework layers? Who's responsible for producing these framework layers? How can these federal agencies and programs be coordinated so that multiple agencies aren't producing the same kinds of data? So then I want you to answer the following questions in the discussion forum. Questions 1 and 2 have to do with your Chapter 7 reading, and question 3 has to do with the final project for this course, and questions 4 through 6 have to do with the documents you examined that I just described. So from your reading, select 2 issues surrounding putting public domain spatial data to work and describe those issues. Describe the steps of the geographic inquiry process, and start thinking about your final project for the course if you haven't already. Describe an idea that you have for the final project and how you might put public domain spatial data to work for your project. Number 4, Executive Order 12906 created the NSDI, or National Spatial Data Infrastructure. State in your own words what the NSDI is and why it's important. Number 5, what are your reactions to the Executive Order? In your opinion, do you think that its 1994 provisions have been realized by 2015? What are some of the barriers to the implementation of NSDI? What are its advantages if this order is carried out to the fullest extent? What do you consider to be the main challenges to the work that the FGDC does? What do you consider to be the main benefits to this work? So that's, in a nutshell, what we're going to do here in this week. But also, you're going to start Lab 4, which is creating a map for an ecotourism company in New Zealand. So in this exercise, you'll do what I've been describing. You're going to put public domain spatial data to work. You're going to plan and create a map for a local ecotourism company. In so doing, you'll need to use public domain data, process it in a GIS, and output the data in several formats. So in prior exercises, I directed you to specific websites to obtain data. I asked you a series of relevant questions. I hope they were interesting to help you think about the geoprocessing that you were performing, but especially upon the data that you were using. And your requirements were quite specific. Now, having worked through these other exercises, you now have an extensive skill set to solve problems in a more open-ended framework. This is the approach that we'll use in this exercise. You will still be encouraged to think about the processes and data, but you will largely direct the project on your own. Now, your mission is, you've been asked to produce a map and set of data for a local ecotourism company in New Zealand. The map will be made available online and for downloading via the company's website. You can choose a particular ecotourism theme to base your project on, and I provided some suggestions. But I want you to also think about your own creative ideas. So that is, in a nutshell, what we're going to do here in Week 7 of GIS 4630, Public Domain Data for GIS. Hope you enjoy it, hope it's valuable and relevant, and we'll see you online. Thanks.